What is up, guys? This is QREM from the Trinity of Lift, and today I'm going to bring all of you guys my Metalfoes deck profile for this April 2016 ban list. Now then, finally, this deck is here in the TCG, and I was very excited for its release simply because this deck combines both Fusion Summoning and Pendulum Summoning together in one deck. And if you guys don't know, that's my favorite methods of summoning right there. And again, it's just so much fun that I'm able to use both of those summoning methods in one single deck. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the deck profile. Alrighty, so starting off with the main deck, we have 3 copies of the Metalfoes Volflame. Now, this is probably going to be your best Metalfoes simply because it's the biggest Metalfoes monster that we have in the main deck, and it's also a scale 8. And in this deck, scale 8s are extremely important simply because there's a ton of really good pendulum monsters that you can pendulum summon that are all like roughly level 6. So because of that, Volflame is again one of the best ones because of that scale 8 and whatnot. Moving on, we have 3 copies of the Metalfoes Go Driver. Now, he is a low skill of the archetype. He is level 4, and him being level 4 is pretty darn cool because we do run Luster Pendulum in this deck, so you do have the option of synchroing Gold Driver with a Luster Pendulum in order to make Ignis to Prominence. And usually whenever you can make Ignis to Prominence, you should, because that card is pretty nuts. So again, Gold Driver is pretty good because he's a level 4 and a low scale. Moving on, we have 3 copies of the Metalfoes Silvered. She is pretty cool because she is scale 1, very similarly to Gold Driver, and she's also a level 3. Now, the level 3 also comes up in this deck because Metalfoes has an issue playing through back row, and because Silvered is a level 3, you are able to have rank 3 access in the deck, and a few of the rank 3s actually are really good at going and playing through back rows. So having Silvered in here at 3, of course, is just like a no-brainer. Finally, for the last Metalfoes, we have we have 3 copies of Metalfoes Steelin. This guy is the other scale 8 of the deck, and he's pretty good because, again, he is a scale 8, but his level is fairly awkward because of being level 2. You don't really have any good rank 2 plays, or you don't really have any, like, consistent synchro plays with Steelin, but still though, he is a scale 8, and like I said with Volflame, that's really important in this deck because of all the cool things you can pendulum summon. So of course we have 3 copies of Steelin to round off our Metalfoes lineup. Moving on, we have a Magispector engine. We have 3 copies of the Kirin, and we have 3 copies of Bambuku. Now, this is the primary, I guess you could say, quote-unquote, cool thing that you can pendulum summon in this deck. Because if you guys have been keeping up with pendulum decks recently, you guys will know that Kirin is just making the world go round, basically. Kirin is just such an insanely strong card in almost every single matchup, except maybe against Cosmos, that any deck that can pendulum summon Kirin usually will be running Kirin, simply, again, because of how strong it is. We also are running the Bambuku in this deck because it obviously searches Kirin, but like I said with Silvered, Bambuku is also a level 3, so you do still have a cool rank 3 access with Bambuku as well. So yeah, that'll be it for the entire Magispector engine we're running. Then continuing on, we have 3 copies of the Guiding Ariadne. Now, this card is in here because Metalfoes in general usually wants to go first and make a board in such a way that you're going to be trying to floodgate your opponent and trying to stop your opponent from as much of their plays as possible. And in order to make that goal a little bit more consistent, we put in 3 copies of Guiding Ariadne because Ariadne does search out our counter traps in the deck. And that's, again, really important because once you make your first turn board, if you're able to set a strike behind whatever board you might make, it just turns your board from really good to insane. So, of course, we have 3 copies of Guiding Ariadne in this deck to help us make our insane boards. Finally, for the last 2 Pendulum monsters, we have 1 copy of Luster Pendulum and 1 copy of Archfin. Now, obviously, Luster Pendulum is really good. You only can run 1, sadly, but again, he's still really good as a 1-of in the deck whenever you do draw him. And then we also have 1 copy of Archfin. Now, this was kind of thrown in last minute because I didn't have any idea of what I wanted to throw in for the 40th card in this deck. So I kind of just threw in Archfin as a filler, but she is still okay because she is a 7 scale. And that's not bad because you can still pendulum summon Kirin if you are using Archfin as a high scale, as well as she is a pseudo MST of the deck. But in my opinion, if you guys have the card, I would highly recommend running Pot of Desires over this card, definitely. Just because Metalfoes could use some free, more free, I guess you could say, +1s, and obviously a +1 is 99% of the time a little bit better than Archfin. So yeah, just wanted to let you guys know about that, and that'll round us off from all of our pendulum monsters. Moving on to our non-pendulum monsters, we have 3 copies of Gofu the Vague Shadow. Now, this card is pretty darn cool. First of all, he is a level 5 tuner monster, which is pretty darn important because there is a cool combo in this deck that you can do to make Ultimate Zolkin with this card, of course. And because of that, again, we just want to have that Ultimate Zolkin access in our deck because of how strong that synchro monster is. And on top of that, Gofu has some little bit added utility in this deck because you can special summon Gofu from your hand if you control no monsters. And when you do, special summon 2 tokens to your side of the field that are 0/0, and they cannot be used as tributes or be used as a synchro material. Now, the reason why that's cool is because of the interaction that it has with all of the Metalfoes monsters, as you can actually use the Gofu tokens that you summon for just free fodder for your pendulum scales, your Metalfoes pendulum scales anyway, as you're actually able to use your pendulum effects from your Metalfoes monster to destroy those tokens and actually set spells and traps in replacement. So it's pretty cool because it kind of acts as like a weird +2, where when you special summon Gofu, you're actually able to turn those tokens into usable cards. So yeah, that is why we have 3 copies of Gofu. Moving on, we have 3 copies of the Fossil Dyna Pachycephalo. Now, this card is in here because it's just a really strong Floodgate monster that you need. Well, actually, you don't need it, but it's just a very strong monster in general for this deck because, you want to try and go first and stop your opponent from as much plays as possible. And this deck does not have any normal summons outside of Magispectre Raccoon. So, because of that, having the ability to have Fossil Dyna as another normal summon that you can open with to make your board just even better is just, in my opinion, it's just a really good option for the deck. And what also is really cool is that Pachycephalo synergizes with this deck extremely well in the sense that you can summon it on your turn, floodgate your opponent for their turn, and then when it comes back to your turn, you're actually able to use your Metalfoes pendulum scales to destroy Fossil Dyna to replace it with any of your Metalfoes spells or traps in your deck. So it kind of allows you to floodgate your opponent's turn and then turn it off on your turn, which is pretty darn cool. So yeah, we have 3 copies of Fossil Dyna to round off our monster lineup. Moving on to our spells, we start off with the one card that really made me fall in love with this deck, which is Metalfoes Fusion. Now, of course, this is an archetype-specific fusion spell, so whenever you do activate it, you can special summon, or not special summon, I guess. The correct name is that you can fusion summon one fusion monster from your deck that is a Metalfoes monster. But the cool thing is that once per turn, whenever this card is in your graveyard, you can actually shuffle the Metalfoes Fusion back from your grave into your deck and then draw 1 card. So the reason why that's so good is because it guarantees that you'll never run out of Metalfoes spells and traps in your deck to set with this with the pendulum scale effects. So Metalfoes Fusion keeps all of your pendulum scales alive, as well as, again, it's just a generic fusion spell that you can use for your Metalfoes monsters, so it just helps you get bigger things on board. So in general, it's just such a good card that you only need to run 1 of, because again, all of your Metalfoes monsters search it out and you can constantly recycle it. So it's really good because it will help you not clog hands. So yeah, we have 1 copy of Metalfoes Fusion. Then we have 2 copies of the Painful Decision. Now, I know this is sort of like a Rhoda for normal monsters, and we are running a lot of normal monsters in this deck just because, again, it is a Metalfoes deck. But the thing is, I did not like 3 copies of this card. There was many times in testing where I would play 3 copies of Painful Decision in my deck and I would open 2 copies of it, and you just really cannot afford to run bad cards in your deck that can help you brick. I'm not saying Painful Decision is a bad card, but it's not as good as it could be, in the sense just because you cannot activate multiple copies per turn. So again, it can just lead to some dead draws if you do run 3 copies of it. So that's why I decided to just go with the happy medium of 2 copies. So yeah, we have 2 copies of Painful Decision. And then finally, we have 1 copy of the Upstart Goblin to round off our entire spell lineup. Alright, moving on to our traps, we have 2 copies of Metalfoes Counter. Now, this card is pretty cool because it just allows you to constantly have a board, as whenever any of your cards on your side of the field is destroyed in any way, shape, or form, including your own effects that destroy your own cards, you can just activate Metalfoes Counter and you can straight up special summon a Metalfoes monster from your deck. Now, this is pretty cool because it gets you just more monsters on board to go into your extra deck again. And what's even better is that Metalfoes Counter has a graveyard effect, as during the turn that this card is in the graveyard but was not sent that turn, you can banish the Metalfoes Counter, and then you can target any of your Metalfoes monsters face up in your extra deck and add it to your hand. So what's really cool about this is that it constantly ensures that you have pendulum scales, that you can make sure that you're pendulum summoning every single turn. And in general, it's just such a good card and most of the time you will be using this at least twice a duel, which is why you do have 2 copies of, because unlike Metalfoes Fusion, you cannot recycle these traps. So again, these are the ones that you kind of actually have to run multiple copies of. But yeah, still though, we have 2 copies of Metalfoes Counter. Then we have one copy of the Metalfoes combination. Now, this card is okay. I'm not going to say it's bad, but the only times you really use this card is when you are using it for combo plays of various things. And outside of that, you never want to see it, you never want to draw it, you never want to search for it, because usually 99 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, counter or fusion is going to be a lot better than combinations. So that is why we only have one copy. Although, again, like I said, it's not a bad card. There are niche situations where you will be wanting to have Metalfoes combination on the field, but we only have to have one copy of it for those niche times. Finally, for the last traps, we have one copy of Solemn Warning, and then following up by 3 copies of the Solemn Strike, because, you know, we're running Ariadne, so yeah, these are the search targets and whatnot. So that'll be it for the entire 40 card main deck. Moving on to the extra deck, we have 2 copies of Metalfoes or Hulk. Like, I want to say a note really fast. I don't know why Konami of the TCG decided to say HALC when the OCG name is Ori Hulk, like, you know, the Incredible Hulk. And I don't even, like, I don't know. It's just such an awkward name to say. But we have 2 copies of Ori Hulk in here because he's probably going to be your most commonly used fusion monster, as he has double piercing damage, which is a pretty good thing because he allows you to punch through your opponent's defensive monsters. And what's cool too is whenever he does leave the field and get sent to the graveyard, you can just simply destroy a card on the field. So that's pretty cool because in general, he's just a pretty good quality monster that you probably will be going into more times than not with your Metalfoes fusion. So that's why we are running 2. Moving on to the other fusion monsters, we have 1 copy of the Metalfoes Adamante. Now, this is in here not because it's a good card, because obviously it's not that great, since it's like in my opinion, it's you can just draw parallels to this card and Dark Magician. But the thing is with Metalfoes Adamante is that it's a level 5, so this is actually the card that you need to fusion summon for in order to synchro summon alongside Gofu the Vague Shadow to make Ultimaya Zolkin. So we're literally just running Adamante just for Ultimaya Zolkin synchro fodder and whatnot. Finally, for the last fusion, we have 1 copy of Metalfoes Crimsonite. This is the card that you need for those Metalfoes combination combos, as there are situations where you can, where you have an Aura Hulk on board plus 2 more Metalfoes monsters, or just 2 small monsters on your side of the field, and you have the ability, if you have combination face up on your side of the field, to fusion summon for Crimsonite using that Aura Hulk plus the 2 other little fodder monsters, and you can make Crimsonite and then trigger combinations effect to special summon your Aura Hulk back, so it gets you 2 fusion monsters for the price of 1 essentially, which is pretty darn cool. And again, that's the pretty much the niche situation where you will be using Metalfoes combination, but in those situations you can really make some big boards with it, so that's why we have to run the Crimsonite. So yeah, that'll be it for the fusions. Moving on to the synchros, we have 1 copy of Ultimaya Zolkin because, like I said, this card is insane. Like, we can make it, so why not, right? Then we have 1 copy of Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon because this is 99 times out of 100 going to be the thing that we're going to be summoning off of Ultimaya. We have 1 copy of Void Ogre for the instances where we don't have a hand and we want to ensure that our board is Raigeki proof or Darkhold proof or something along that line. So that's why we are having the Void Ogre in here. I have 1 copy of Scrap Dragon because I need something in the extra deck, or at least I wanted something that outs Anti-Spell, and I felt Scrap Dragon was probably the best option for me, so that's why I have that there. We have 1 copy of Ignister because, like I said, this card is insane, so we have Ignister. 1 copy of Stardust Spark Dragon. This isn't really here primarily for the main deck because there isn't really a lot of things that you need this for, because like most of the time you will be using Void Ogre Dragon if you're that afraid of some kind of big removal like Raigeki rather than Spark Dragon. But we have Spark Dragon in the extra deck primarily for games 2 and 3 when you're siding in Floodgates yourself to just ensure that you have some way to protect those Floodgates, and that's why we have Spark Dragon in here. Then we have 1 copy of Black Rose Dragon simply because I wanted to have a level 7 option in the extra deck, and there are times actually when you can legitimately make Black Rose Dragon with Metalfoes Steelin and Gofu, and usually like that instance will come up very rarely, but it does, and I personally feel that Black Rose Dragon, you need to run this card just for those situations when you actually can make it and it'll do something good. So yeah, we have 1 copy of Black Rose, and then finally for the last synchro we have 1 copy of Cypher Lord Omega because he's like broken. So yeah. So that is it for the synchros. Moving on to the Xyz, we have 1 copy of Totem Bird for the instances that we do have 2 copies of Bambuku on the field. Usually you'll be summoning this turn 1 if you already open Bambuku plus a Kirin, as when you do get the search effect of the Bambuku, inevitably you're able to actually search a second copy of Bambuku with the first copy, and then if you can Pendulum Summon, you're able to Pendulum Summon a Kirin backed up with 2 Bambukus, and you can turn those 2 Bambukus into a Totem Bird. So it's pretty cool. So that's why we have the 1 copy of Totem Bird in here. Then we have the one copy of Super Quantum Mech Beast Grand Pulse, because like I said, playing through back row in this deck is pretty difficult, so having a way to just straight up destroy it like an MST is pretty nice. And then finally, for the 15th card in our extra deck, we have one copy of number 11 Big Eye. Now, this guy does not come up too often because the only way you can make it in this deck is with 2 copies of Volflame on the board. But if you can make it, he does come in pretty not bad in the parts of the late game when you have to try and push for damage. So we do have one copy of Big Eye to round off our 15 card extra deck. And then, of course, these are my Gofu tokens. Rest in peace, Nephilim. May you always be remembered. So, yeah. Alright guys, well that will be it for my Metalfoes deck profile. I want to ask you guys now down in the comment section below, tell me what deck you guys are looking forward to the most in the Dark Illusion moving forward. Because in my opinion, this recent set is just a lot of fun. Like, there's a lot of cool cards in the set. And I'm excited to see how our meta is going to shape up in the future with Metalfoes and Blue Eyes and maybe even Subterrors and Spirals if they decide to make a competitive impact. So again, as always, this is QREM from the Trinity of Lift, and I'll see all of you guys later. Peace out.